With Donald Trump having won the elections in the United States, for India, a big focus point is going to be the trade relationship, the economic relationship between India and the United States. The relationship between Washington and New Delhi has really gone from strength to strength, but will there be some potential roadblocks in the days ahead? Joining us now, a very special guest, Vijay Advani, is the Chairman Emeritus of the US-India Business Council. He joins us now. Thanks, Mr. Advani, very much for speaking to us. In your opinion, does the economic and trade or the diplomatic relationship between India and the United States, is that dependent on who is in power, or do you think whether it's Democrats or Republicans, the trajectory of this relationship is going in only one direction, up?
So first of all, Vishnu, thank you for having me. I think it's a two-part question. So first, let's talk about the geopolitics. I think India and the US has come a long way in its relationships across multiple administrations, multiple parties, right? Starting from Bill Clinton onwards to Bush, to Obama, to Trump, to Biden. So I think that relationship is here to stay. It's getting stronger and stronger. We noticed that even in the congratulatory tweet and phone call that Prime Minister Modi recently did with Trump. And I think they're both alpha males with very good relationships. So I'm quite optimistic about that. As far as trade is concerned, clearly, I think it's very similar to how India has its views on Make in India. It's similar to that. It's Make in America. Trump's mandate was to basically win, to create jobs in the US. So I think his administration is going to look at the trade imbalances and use a fairly blunt instrument on tariffs. And India will be, one of the countries that definitely will get impacted along with many others.
Now, in terms of tariffs, which are the areas where you potentially see tariffs coming in, which might impact India?
I think, one has to wait and see whether it's going to be targeted tariffs on China, which may be beneficial to India, or whether it's across the board. I think from a US perspective, as you know, I was the chairman of the US-India Business Council. We looked at, in the agricultural sector, e-commerce, medical devices, deep sea exploration, defense, and electronic manufacturing. All these areas where US companies want to engage with India. It's a big market, but they are frustrated. They are at times, there are hurdles that they see. And so I think these all will be put on the table to have a discussion in the early days.
Mr. Advani, before we get down to specific sectors, do you believe that the personal relationship between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, perhaps the word friend wouldn't be appropriate, at that level, nobody is really a friend, but the fact is that they've shared a close association. Does that help the relationship between India and the US?
It definitely does, but I'll take you back to Trump 1.0 when Trump just came into power. Shinzo Abe of Japan took the first flight out and came to the US to sit down and defang Trump in a way, to have a sit down and have a negotiation. So I think the ball is in India's court. If India wants to basically do an across-the-board trade agreement with the United States, or at least a fairly far-reaching trade agreement, versus being reactive and transactional. And I hope that this takes the relationship even further if India really uses this to pull the Band-Aid off and really have a more globalized view of the world as opposed to a protectionist view.
So let's talk about sectors where there has been a lot of potential. Semiconductors, both nations believe there must be resilient supply chains, and that's absolutely necessary. Do you believe that given the size of India's economy, the fact that it's booming, the demand is growing, semiconductors fulfill a requirement across the sector from auto to space to defense, that this is an area where both sides can really prosper if we collaborate?
Yes, I think there are two separate views. From an India perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to have some manufacturing of semiconductors in India, which they've begun to pursue. But again, keep in mind Trump's mandate has to be being onshoring as opposed to offshoring. And so it'll be very clear that from in the Trump administration's perspective, that manufacturing semiconductors in the US, bringing it back, whether from Taiwan or Korea, would be a first priority, as opposed to trying to offshore it into other countries away from Taiwan, away from China.
Would you suggest that India's philosophy of Atmanirbharta, which, for example, extends in a big way in the defense sector, could be challenged by new US policy? We've been reaching out to American companies that look, please build in India, transfer genuine technology, whether it's specific weapon systems or jet engines, most significantly. But do you believe that in the new administration there'll be some sort of effort of drawing that down?
I think the administration will be fairly pro-business. And that's why I go back to Trump 1.0. I think the Indian government, Indian administration needs to come with a bigger plan. And I'm quite sure that part of it would be built in America and a part of it will be built in India. And so it could be a win-win situation if one comes up with a bigger strategic plan as opposed to doing a sector by sector transactional, trying to take out certain impediments without it being across the board. So I frankly, I'm optimistic from an India perspective that this kind of pushes India to really become part of a global supply chain in order to and take advantage of this, Trump administration pushing India to openness.
So other areas of close cooperation, there are many, but the transfer of green energy tech to India is something that benefits both countries. What do you see the potential in that going forward?
I think the administration has been quite clear that that's not a high priority for the US government now. I mean, under the Trump administration, I think under the Biden administration, we were pushing harder for green energy. But I think India has an opportunity here, keeping aside the United States, to take a leadership role for the rest of the world, whether it's exporting to Africa, exporting to Europe, exporting to other countries in Asia. So I think India has an opportunity. It's a great manufacturing hub with better infrastructure. It can actually take a leadership role there as opposed to waiting for technology transfer from the US, because that definitely there will be some breaks out there.
But just going forward now, India is an important partner of America, but there are wars to be settled in Europe and West Asia. America would have a role in that. Do you believe that in a finite period of time, once perhaps after the wars are sorted, China would be the center of the focus of the Trump administration from an international perspective, and that includes economic dealings with China in the Indo-Pacific region?
Yeah, I think China, there's a shared concern both between the United States and India on China. So this is an opportunity for India to kind of step up and partner with the United States. They both have a common friend in Israel, and they have a common relationships, a good solid relationship between both the leaders. So I think China will be the focus. Question is whether India can capitalize on that instability with China, whether it's trade wars, whether it is cyber security. There are various areas that both India and China have concern. Both India and the US have concerns on China. I think this is an opportunity for India to capitalize.
Right, Mr. Advani, thank you very much for speaking to us, sharing your views on the economic future and the trade future perhaps between India and the United States with the new government coming into power very soon.